Their global escalation risk. When the United States enters a conflict like the one between Iran and Israel, the entire dynamic shifts almost instantly. What might begin as a contained regional confrontation can quickly evolve into a much broader and more complex situation. This happens because the U.S. is deeply connected through military alliances, strategic partnerships, and security commitments across different parts of the world. For example, the U.S. has long-standing defense ties with multiple countries in the Middle East and beyond. If it becomes actively involved, those allies may feel obligated to support or respond in some way, whether politically, economically, or even militarily. At the same time, nations that oppose U.S. influence could see this as an opportunity to counterbalance that power, increasing their own involvement either directly or indirectly. Another critical factor is how quickly military actions can escalate. A single strike can lead to retaliation, which then triggers further counterattacks. This chain reaction can spiral faster than expected, especially when multiple nations are involved, each with their own interests, red lines, and military capabilities. Modern warfare also isn't limited to traditional battlefields. It can expand into cyber attacks, naval confrontations in key waterways, and even threats to global trade routes. There's also the risk of miscalculation. In high-tension environments, decisions are often made under pressure and with limited information. A move intended as a warning could be interpreted as an act of war. Communication breakdowns, misunderstandings, or delayed responses can all contribute to unintended escalation. When major powers are involved, even a small error can have massive consequences. Additionally, the presence of advanced weapon systems on all sides increases the stakes significantly. Precision strikes, missile defense systems, and long-range capabilities mean that the scale of impact is much larger than in past conflicts. This raises concerns not just about regional stability, but about the possibility of a wider confrontation that could involve multiple powerful nations at once. As tensions rise, global attention intensifies, and markets, governments, and militaries around the world begin reacting in real time. The situation becomes more volatile with every passing moment, making it harder to contain and easier to expand beyond its original scope. Economic impact worldwide. When tensions rise between Iran and Israel, and especially if the United States becomes directly involved, the global economy doesn't just react, it starts to feel immediate pressure from multiple directions at once. One of the first and most visible impacts is on energy markets, particularly oil. The Middle East plays a critical role in global oil supply, and any disruption or threat to that supply can send prices rising within hours. Even the possibility of conflict is enough to create uncertainty in the markets. Traders and investors begin to anticipate supply shortages, leading to rapid price increases. This directly affects fuel costs, meaning higher gas prices for everyday consumers, especially in countries heavily dependent on imports. Transportation, shipping, and manufacturing costs also go up, creating a ripple effect across almost every industry. As energy prices rise, inflation tends to follow. Businesses facing higher operational costs often pass those expenses on to consumers. Groceries, utilities, and basic goods can become more expensive, putting pressure on households and reducing overall spending power. For many families, this doesn't just mean inconvenience, it can significantly affect their daily budgeting and financial stability. Financial markets also react strongly to geopolitical instability. Stock markets can become volatile, with sharp declines driven by fear and uncertainty. Investors often move their money into safer assets, such as gold or government bonds, which can further disrupt normal market behavior. This shift in investment patterns can slow down economic growth, as companies face reduced funding and increased risk. Global trade routes are another major concern. Key shipping lanes, especially those near conflict zones, may become unsafe or restricted. This can delay shipments, increase insurance costs, and create shortages of important goods. Industries that rely on global supply chains, like electronics, automobiles, and retail, may experience disruptions that take weeks or even months to stabilize. Currencies can also fluctuate during times of conflict. Countries directly or indirectly involved may see their currencies weaken due to instability, while others might strengthen as investors seek safer economies. These fluctuations can impact international trade balances, import-export costs, and overall economic confidence. At the same time, governments may be forced to increase military spending, redirecting funds from domestic programs into defense. This can affect public services, infrastructure projects, and social programs, adding another layer of economic strain. All of these factors combine to create a highly unstable economic environment where uncertainty drives decision-making, and even small developments in the conflict can trigger large-scale financial reactions across the globe. Military power shift. If the United States becomes directly involved in a conflict between Iran and Israel, the balance of military power in the region would shift almost immediately. The United States possesses one of the most advanced and well-funded military forces in the world, with capabilities that extend far beyond traditional ground combat. Its presence alone can change how every other country involved approaches the situation. One of the most significant changes would be the scale and precision of military operations. The U.S. relies heavily on advanced technologies, satellite surveillance, drone warfare, cyber capabilities, and precision-guided munitions. This means that strikes can be more targeted, faster, and carried out from long distances. Military decisions would no longer be limited to regional capabilities. Instead, they would involve global coordination, intelligence sharing, and high-level strategic planning. The introduction of U.S. naval forces would also play a critical role. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, and submarines could be positioned in nearby waters, allowing rapid response to any escalation. These naval assets are not just defensive. They can project power across vast distances, making it possible to carry out operations without even stepping onto land. Their presence can act as both a deterrent and a signal of readiness for large-scale engagement. Air dominance is another major factor. The U.S. Air Force has the ability to control airspace using advanced fighter jets, stealth aircraft, and missile defense systems. Gaining control of the skies can significantly limit the opponent's ability to launch effective attacks, shifting the momentum of the conflict. This kind of advantage forces other nations to adapt quickly, often escalating their own strategies in response. At the same time, Iran's military approach is built differently. Rather than relying solely on conventional forces, it has developed asymmetric strategies, including missile systems, regional proxies, and unconventional tactics. This creates a complex battlefield where traditional military superiority doesn't automatically guarantee quick or simple outcomes. Instead, it can lead to prolonged engagements with unpredictable developments. The involvement of the U.S. would also increase coordination between allied forces. Intelligence sharing, joint operations, and combined defense strategies could bring multiple countries into closer military alignment. This level of coordination can amplify the effectiveness of operations, but it also increases the number of actors involved, making the situation more complex and harder to control. Cyber warfare would likely become a major component as well. Modern conflicts are no longer limited to physical battlefields. Attacks on communication systems, infrastructure, and digital networks can disrupt entire operations without a single shot being fired. With the technological capabilities of the United States, this domain becomes a powerful tool that can influence the direction of the conflict in less visible but highly impactful ways. As more advanced weapon systems, strategies, and global resources are introduced into the conflict, the intensity and reach of military actions expand significantly, altering not just the battlefield, but the entire structure of how the conflict is fought. Thus, retaliation risk. If the United States becomes directly involved in a conflict involving Iran and Israel, the likelihood of retaliation increases significantly, and it may not be limited to a single battlefield. Iran has developed a strategy that goes beyond conventional warfare, allowing it to respond in multiple ways across different regions rather than relying on one direct confrontation. One of the key concerns is the presence of U.S. military bases across the Middle East. These bases are strategically located, but they can also become potential targets in the event of escalation. Iran has the capability to launch missile strikes or coordinate attacks that could put these installations at risk. Even limited strikes can have a major impact, not just militarily, but politically, increasing pressure for further response. Beyond direct military targets, there is also the risk to U.S. allies in the region. Countries that are seen as supportive of American operations could face indirect retaliation. This expands the scope of the conflict, pulling more nations into a cycle of action and response. The more actors involved, the more complicated it becomes to manage escalation or maintain control over the situation. Another important factor is Iran's network of regional influence. Over the years, it has built relationships with various groups and forces across the Middle East. In a conflict scenario, these groups could become active, opening multiple fronts at once. Instead of a single, clearly defined battlefield, the conflict could spread across different areas simultaneously, making it harder to predict or contain. Retaliation doesn't always come in the form of traditional attacks. Cyber operations could also play a major role. Critical infrastructure, such as power systems, communication networks, or financial institutions, can be targeted in ways that disrupt daily life without direct physical damage. These kinds of actions can create widespread uncertainty and affect both military and civilian systems. There's also the psychological aspect of retaliation. The constant threat of unexpected attacks can create pressure on decision-makers, forcing rapid responses that may not always be fully calculated. This environment increases the chances of mistakes or overreactions, which can further escalate tensions. In addition, maritime routes and strategic waterways could become points of tension. Any disruption in these areas can affect global trade and energy supply, amplifying the impact of retaliation beyond the immediate conflict zone. Even small-scale incidents in such critical locations can draw significant international attention and response. As retaliation builds from different directions, military, cyber, regional, and strategic, the conflict becomes less predictable, with each move increasing the risk of further escalation and widening the overall scope of confrontation. Alliances get pulled in. If the United States becomes directly involved in a conflict between Iran and Israel, one of the most immediate consequences would be the activation and pressure of global alliances. Modern geopolitics is deeply interconnected, and very few major countries operate in isolation. When a superpower like the United States takes a clear position in a conflict, allied nations are often forced to respond, whether they are fully prepared or not. The United States is part of multiple defense and strategic partnerships around the world. Some of these alliances are formal, involving security agreements and mutual defense commitments, while others are based on long-standing political and military cooperation. Once the U.S. steps in, these relationships come into focus, and allied countries may feel obligated to provide support. This support doesn't always mean sending troops immediately. It can include intelligence sharing, logistical assistance, financial backing, or political endorsement. At the same time, countries that oppose U.S. influence may begin to align more closely with Iran or take positions that counterbalance American involvement. This creates a situation where the conflict is no longer about just 2 or 3 nations, but rather about blocks of countries with competing interests. As these blocks form, the geopolitical landscape becomes more divided, increasing the chances of a broader, multi-nation confrontation. There is also the issue of regional alliances within the Middle East itself. Neighboring countries often have their own strategic concerns, rivalries, and internal pressures. Some may support Israel, others may sympathize with Iran, and many will try to avoid direct involvement while still protecting their own interests. However, as tensions rise, maintaining neutrality becomes increasingly difficult. Even indirect actions, such as allowing airspace access or hosting military assets, can be seen as taking sides. International organizations may also become more active during such a crisis. Diplomatic efforts, emergency meetings, and calls for de-escalation often increase, but these efforts can sometimes be overshadowed by the pace of military and political developments on the ground. The involvement of multiple countries can make coordination more difficult, as each nation brings its own priorities and limitations to the table. Another layer of complexity comes from domestic pressure within allied countries. Governments may face public opinion, political opposition, or economic concerns that influence how they respond to the situation. Leaders must balance international commitments with internal stability, which can lead to inconsistent or evolving positions over time. As more countries become involved, directly or indirectly, the chain of alliances begins to expand. Each new participant adds another set of decisions, strategies, and potential reactions, making the situation increasingly difficult to predict or control. The conflict starts to move beyond its original scope, shaped not just by the primary actors, but by a growing network of global and regional partnerships that are drawn into the unfolding crisis. Unpredictable outcomes. When a conflict involves countries like the United States, Iran, and Israel, one of the most difficult aspects to manage is uncertainty. Even with advanced intelligence systems, experienced leadership, and detailed planning, the reality is that no one can fully predict how events will unfold once escalation begins. Every decision carries consequences, and those consequences can quickly lead to outcomes that were never originally intended. One of the biggest challenges comes from how quickly situations can change. A single event, such as a missile strike, a misinterpreted signal, or an unexpected casualty, can alter the direction of the conflict within hours. What may have started as a controlled response can suddenly turn into a broader escalation, simply because one side reacts more strongly than anticipated. These rapid shifts make it extremely difficult for leaders to stay ahead of the situation. Communication also plays a critical role, and in high-pressure environments, it is not always reliable. Messages between countries may be delayed, unclear, or misunderstood. Diplomatic channels that are meant to reduce tension can break down or become ineffective when trust is low. In such conditions, actions are often judged more by perception than intention, increasing the risk of overreaction. Another factor is the involvement of multiple actors, each with their own goals and strategies. Not every group or allied force operates with the same level of coordination or discipline. Independent actions by smaller groups or regional players can trigger responses that larger powers then feel compelled to address. This creates a chain reaction where control becomes more difficult with each additional participant. Technological complexity adds another layer of unpredictability. Modern military systems rely on advanced software, automated defenses, and real-time data analysis. While these systems are highly effective, they are not immune to errors, malfunctions, or cyber interference. A technical failure or false alarm could lead to decisions being made under incorrect assumptions, increasing the chances of unintended escalation. There is also the human element. Leaders and military commanders must make critical decisions under intense pressure, often with incomplete information. Stress, urgency, and the fear of appearing weak can influence judgment. In some cases, decisions are made not just based on strategy, but also on perception, reputation, and the need to respond quickly. This can lead to actions that escalate the situation further rather than stabilizing it. Economic and political reactions can also introduce unexpected consequences. Sanctions, market crashes, or sudden shifts in public opinion can force governments to change their approach mid-conflict. What may have seemed like a manageable situation at first can become far more complicated as internal and external pressures begin to build. As all these elements interact, military actions, political decisions, technological systems, and human judgment, the situation becomes increasingly complex. Each new development adds another layer of uncertainty, making it harder to anticipate what will happen next or how far the conflict might spread.